So when looking at the comma, commas are important. It's the difference between let's eat grandma and let's eat grandma. So commas save lives. Has no one seen, who hasn't seen Silence of the Lambs?
I haven't either.
I've seen parts of it.
Oh my goodness, you have to see it. It's fantastic. Homework for the weekend.
Yeah.
You could take homework for the night and then extend the paper.
Extra credit.
So, commas mark a natural pause and or prevent misreading. So this is often noted as like a dramatic pause. You'll notice this as you see this. So, for instance, a natural pause. A single file line of school children walked past a military checkpoint Sunday as a bomb-loaded truck veered towards them and exploded, killing 14 in a flash, as captured by a U.S. military security camera. You notice that it's like a dramatic pause. It's like an aside. This is going to be, you'll notice this more in kind of narrative writing. But this is when you start seeing this as an aside, that's going to be using rule number 1. Another way you can do this is to permit misreading. Now, let's look at this. An FBI affidavit, 26 pages long, described such activities as threatening to rescind $8 million in state funds for a children's hospital because an executive neglected to give him a campaign contribution and trying to blackmail the Chicago Tribune and firing editorial writers had displeased him. For one, this sentence has a lot going on. This would do very well to be more than one sentence. There's a lot trying to get in here. But that sounds like a very naughty executive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Problem is, it's not the executive, even though that's how it sounds like from reading it. It's the FBI affidavit talking about, does anybody, oh, you haven't read it yet, but for anybody who's read chapter 3 or 4 yet, it's they're talking about Rod Blagojevich, Governor Rod Blagojevich, who was trying to sell Barack Obama's Senate seat after he was elected president. So this was an FBI investigation. This is reporting on an FBI investigation on him. So the issue is that these are two naughty things that he did, threatening to rescind $8 million in state funds for a children's hospital and trying to blackmail the Chicago Tribune. So you'll notice that in the blue paragraph after campaign contribution, we put a comma here and then and trying to blackmail the Chicago Tribune, trying to separate out those two ideas. Now, granted, I think a better way of writing something like this, remember, think of a salute, standalone linguistic unit of thought. We should be able to separate these out into 2 sentences in order for it to be more clarifying. But this is another way in which commas can be used in order to break up complex sentences that need multiple ideas. Now, commas can be used to mark an omission. Often you substitute the word and. So this is all, by the way, if you see it in quotes, that means that it's coming from Coffey. These are examples from Coffey's book. So 7-year-old Sheelan began to whimper, then tremble, while the woman pushed apart her legs and the midwife raised a stainless steel razor blade in the air. "I do this in the name of Allah," she intoned. This is a description of female genital mutilation in sub-Saharan Africa. And you'll notice that the right there, whimper, then tremble. We could have easily put began to whimper and then tremble. But for dramatic effect, you substitute the word and. So it's marking an omission. And you'll notice this when you do the comma workshop. You'll see the great question to ask is, could and be replaced in here? Separating out those ideas, separating out those words, whimper, then tremble. And then the second comma, while the one push apart, we'll see that in another rule. That's rule number 6. So we'll take a look at that. Now, commas separate items in a series. You want to place a comma between coordinate adjectives and between items in a series. We've seen this before. I went to the store and I bought milk, comma, eggs, comma, and bread. This is a usage we see a lot. Let's look at this one. Mr. Panera posits in brief that mass immigration, economic decline, and moral degradation will trigger a civil war next fall and the collapse of the dollar. You notice that there's a comma after the and, after the coordinating conjunction. That's what's called an Oxford comma. And that's going to be really useful in terms of clarifying what you're talking about. Let's look at the Oxford comma when it is not used and how unclear it can be. Israel said that amongst 30 or more targets destroyed Saturday and Sunday were the main security compound and prison in Gaza City known as the Saraya, metal workshops, and Hamas military posts. Now, how many targets are we talking about? 2, 3, or 4? Is it the compound and prison and workshops and posts as 2 separate compounds? Or is it the compound and prison and then workshops and then military posts? Or is it 4 compound, prison, workshops, and posts? It's not necessarily clear, but if we look at the logic of the sentence, the main security compound and prison in Gaza City, known as the Saraya, compound and prison is going to be one area. That's one building complex.
Good.
Metal workshops and Hamas military posts, the distance, in the real world distance between those metal workshops and the Hamas military posts are about 12 kilometers. So we need to put a comma after workshops in order to separate out that those are different locations, because that comma right there would be a 12-kilometer comma. And so we want to make sure that the logic of the sentence is still sitting there, because compound and prison, they're using and without a comma, which means that those two are inextricably linked. They're together. It's like spaghetti and meatballs. You wouldn't say I ate spaghetti, comma, and meatballs. But workshops and military posts are not one complex. So in order to keep the logic of the sentence, we need to put a comma after workshops. Now, here's one that's interesting. We subsequently met in Hyannis Port, Washington, and Miami for a series of conversations that extended over days. Now, this sounds like 2 cities, right? Hyannis Port, Washington, and Miami, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like 2 cities. Problem is that Hyannis Port is in Massachusetts. But the way that it looks is that it's Hyannis Port, comma, Washington, and then Miami. So it looks like it's 2, but really we should put Hyannis Port, comma, Washington, comma, and Miami in order for us to signify that it's Hyannis Port, Washington. Is it Washington State or Washington, D.C.?
Probably state. Nope, got to be the city, because the other ones are cities as well.
Very good. One of these things is not like the other one. Very good. It's true. Hyannis Port is a city in Massachusetts. Washington is a city where it looks like, and Miami is a city. So it would be odd if we didn't say Washington State or Washington, D.C. So if you're ever talking about Washington for anything, make sure that you're either saying Washington State or Washington, D.C. in order to clarify what you're talking about. Let's look at the next one. A diamond radiates warmth, light, and an unfailing beauty. Well, if we were to look at the way that the logic of this sentence is without the Oxford comma, light and unfailing act as modifiers for beauty. Warmth, comma, light, and unfailing beauty. But what is light beauty? Is that diet beauty? Is that beauty sugar-free? No, they're talking about, it being iridescent, about light coming through it. So we want to make sure that there's a comma after light in order to show that there are 3 different qualities that are being talked about. So warmth, comma, light, comma, and unfailing beauty. You can use the and rule to say, can I fit and in between all of these? And if so, you can put a comma there. But here the and rule doesn't work. He occupied the same gracious apartment since 1945. Now, think of this almost like a transitive property that you can move them around if you have a comma. If you have a comma between two adjectives, what that's saying is that you can interchange those adjectives. But the problem is that when's the last time you called anything graciously same? what does graciously same mean if you switch them around to be in a very, very nice way that it hasn't changed at all? Doesn't make any sense. So we don't need the comma. He occupied the same gracious apartment since 1945. Since the two adjectives are not interchangeable, you don't need the comma. Now, rule 4, when joining main clauses with ABS of NY. And, but, so, or, for, nor, or yet. You can often use this. People also call this fanboys is another one that people use. So it gives you an idea of what's going on with that. So when joining main clauses with abs of NY, use the comma. So when using and, but, so, or, for, nor, or yet, as basically a coordinating conjunction, doing some sort of a comparison, two ideas that are related but not inextricably linked. They're not spaghetti and meatballs. But let's take a look at this. A man whose memoir about his experience during the Holocaust was to have been published in February has admitted that his story was embellished. And on Saturday evening, his publisher canceled the release of the book. So you notice that the ideas are not exactly the same, saying that a man whose memoir about the Holocaust was to be published in February, and then the results of that. So they're related, but they're not inextricably linked. They're not part of the same idea. So you use the comma after the coordinating conjunction and in order to signify that there is a separation of ideas, but they are related. Honestly, if I was writing the sentence though, I would have split it up into two sentences. Let's look at another one here. By the way, nobody writes like this. This is a very New England way of writing, but it is an example in coffee that I want you to look at. One look at the bill of fare taped to the window of Wolfie and Neil and Mrs. UG, who reads menus the way Talmudic scholars read the Torah, was in a tizzy. This is in a very simplified way. She looked at a bill, it was expensive, and she got mad. But the real big issue here is the company name, Wolfie and Neil and Mrs. UG. Well, is that the company? No, it's Wolfie and Neil. So you need a comma out, before the and in order to signify that Mrs. UG is the subject of the sentence. The and% kind of gives it away that that's the name of the company, but if you're just reading it, your mind will blow past it. Punctuation is very much like music. If there was no rests in music, the rests are just as important as the notes. Otherwise, all your music would sound like noise without rests. Well, punctuation is your rests in language, and so
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Can you explain abs of New York again?
Yeah. So it's using a comma before a coordinating conjunction. So and, but, so, or, for, nor, and yet. I actually have some new examples that I put in that will kind of give a better idea of what I'm talking about in here, because these are the two from the book that'll be explained, but here's some that I just added on. So working from home has been a challenge, but it is worth it to keep everyone safe. You notice that these two are not the same idea. They're having some sort of comparison or contrast, and the coordinating conjunction is facilitating that. So you want to make sure you put a comma to signify to someone, this is the idea that's being taught. These are the two ideas. They're related, but they're not one and the same. Working from home has been a challenge, so that's one idea, but you want to make a comparison or a contrast, but it is worth it to keep everyone safe. Or look at this one. Blackboard is one way to submit assignments, or one can use Google Drive. Here's another one. One can try to empty one's email box as often as possible, yet the emails keep coming. So they're related ideas, but they're not one and the same. It's not the same idea. So you use that comma within the coordinating conjunction in order to clarify that there is a separate idea that is related to the first idea in your sentence. This will make more sense as we go along, particularly with chapter 4, as we go into the workshop that reinforces it. This is basically just to get you guys exposed. Coffee's going to explain this more in the book, and then it'll be even more explained in the workshop. So commas can separate appositives. Appositives are great. These are noun or noun phrases that define other nouns. So this is going to be like titles or noun phrases, things like that. So I'll show you what I mean by that. With his investment bank facing near certain failure, Lehman Brothers Holdings chief executive officer Richard Fuld Jr. placed yet another phone call to the man he thought could save him. Now, if you look at the beginning of the sentence, with his investment bank facing a near certain failure, well, that's an introductory clause or phrase. That's going to be rule 6. We're going to see that in a second. So now we have the subject of the sentence, Lehman Brothers Holdings CEO. So that's the subject of the sentence. It's a business title. Then the appositive is the noun phrase, is the noun or noun phrase that's in between those commas. And in this case, it's a proper noun. It's a name. The name is giving more information to Lehman Brothers chief executive officer. You could easily flip this around too and make the subject Richard Fuld Jr. and make the appositive Lehman Brothers CEO. So an appositive is going to add information. It's a noun or noun phrase that's going to add information. For instance, if you were to say like Disneyland, comma, the happiest place on earth, comma, is in Anaheim, California, the comma, the happiest place on earth, comma, would be the appositive. It's a noun phrase that's adding more information to the term Disneyland. Now, sometimes appositives are essential. My brother Bob is a surfer. Well, if you have one brother, then you don't really need to know the name. It's extra information. So it is not essential to know. Now, if it is essential and you do need to know that information, it no longer becomes an appositive. And this is all based off of context. So if I were to say, like, if you and I were speaking and I said, hey, my brother and I are going paintballing this weekend. If you know that I have one brother, it doesn't really matter who it is because you know that it's one brother. You know the person I'm referring to. If I say my brother and I are going paintballing this weekend and I have 6 brothers, well, your natural inclination would to ask what?
Which brother?
Which brother, correct. So if you have to know the information is no longer essential. I mean, it's no longer an appositive. It's essential information that you have to know. So you have to take the commas off. And this is all based off of context. If it's something that needs to be known, then it's no longer, it's not non-essential. You'll notice that when you put things in commas, this is kind of the larger theme, is that when you sandwich something between 2 commas, it's usually because it's considered extra or non-essential information. And that's why you would signify that to the reader through the uses of commas. So let's look at an example. Here's another one. I just added these, topical, right? Dr. Anthony Fauci, comma, head immunologist for the COVID-19 task force, comma, stated Sunday that more lives could have been saved if mitigation efforts had started earlier. This is real, by the way. Trump is thinking of firing him now, as of last night. So you'll notice that Dr. Anthony Fauci is our subject. So what would be our appositive? What's sandwiched between the commas? Big hint, it's in red.
It's the head immunologist for the COVID-19 task force.
Correct. That would be the appositive because it is adding more information to the subject, Dr. Anthony Fauci. Let's try another one. This one I didn't highlight on purpose. Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York, noted that more respirators are needed in the next few days. So what is the subject of this sentence? Cuomo, exactly, Andrew Cuomo. So what would be the appositive?
Governor.
Governor of New York.
Governor of New York. It's adding more information to the subject, Andrew Cuomo. Very good. So let's go on to rule number 6. Commas should set off other non-restrictive elements. The Interior Department has moved to open some or all federal waters which begin 3 miles from shore and are outside of state control for exploration as early as 2010. Now, you'll notice that this is, some people get confused between this and a positives. This is going to be a clause or phrase that actually is being used. And you're going to notice it's going to have a non-essential element. So you're going to have those trigger words like which, who, where, since, things like that. Those are always going to be in there when you use a non-restrictive element, when you use rule number 6. So you'll notice that if we took out the non-restrictive element, it still makes sense. The Interior Department has moved to open some or all federal waters for exploration as early as 2010. I mean, the point of it is saying when. The extra information that's being added is where it is, which begin 3 miles from shore outside of state control. It's ordered to give extra information for the reader to kind of understand. But the key concept of the sentence is when they're being opened, not necessarily where they're at. Now, here's the difference in terms of context between something that's essential, which means you don't need the comma, and something that's non-essential. And it changes in a very in very subtle ways, but very profound ways, the meaning of the sentence. The landlord hated students who had proven themselves to be slobs, as opposed to the landlord hated students who had proven themselves to be slobs. Here's the difference. In the first one, in the black one, the essential clause where you do not need a comma because this is an essential part. It is something you have to know. What that means is that the landlord only hated students who had proven themselves to be slobs. So he only hated messy students.
Okay.
In the second one, the landlord hated students. Full stop. And all the bits after the comma are just explainer as to why he hates all students. So in the first one, it acts as a specific modifier for the type of people that the landlord hated. In the second one, because of the comma saying that this isn't as important for you to know, it's extra information, the comma is just basically adding more information as to why the landlord hated all students. So either of these are correct. It's just a matter of context. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? Which is, the reason why this is a little bit more nuanced in the way that we think about these things. Now, commas can set off introductory clauses or phrases. This is essentially rule number 6, but at the beginning, using a clause or phrase at the beginning of a sentence. Amid a sour economy, since the beginning of time, comma. Usually rule number 7 sets a time or a place or a feeling. So amid a sour economy, one business appears to be thriving as the year comes to a close. Counterfeiting. So we have amid a sour economy. So it's setting the scene for what the sentence is talking about. Here's one where we don't have the comma and we have to think about it for a second where the comma goes. As far as they knew, bad things happened when people came. Now, naturally, when you first read that, you go, as far as they knew bad things. But then once you read it again, where does the comma go?
After new?
After new. As far as they knew, bad things happened when people came. If anybody's read ahead, this is actually talking about the Michael Vick dogfighting case. They're referring to what the dogs were thinking, or how the dogs were behaving. Now, you want to make sure that you are careful of usage. This is a great example that goes into Coffey goes into great detail in the book. While Pennington was effective once again, Favre struggled. Well, this doesn't tell us too much because it could really go either way. While Pennington was effective, once again, Favre struggled. Or while Pennington was effective once again, Favre struggled. So you want to be careful of usage because it could really go either way.
Mm-hmm.
Now, commas should be used with interruptives. These act as larger, coordinating conjunctions, like especially when you're using comparison or contrast. Expressions like on the other hand, or for example, however, though, in fact. So if you want to look at it. At the end, though, the story of financial products is not about math and financial formulas. Now, if we were to look at how this is going to be done on the worksheet or in the workshop, at the end, that would be rule 7, because that comma right there is starting, is setting off a introductory clause or phrase. Then we have rule number 8, though, sandwiched between those two commas. So you have rule 7 and then rule 8 being used. And that's how we would be able to identify. So when you have the worksheet, it's almost going to act like a quiz or a test, but you can basically edit your answers until you get everything right. Now, commas are used in some conventional ways, like dates, titles, degrees, not to be confused with the positives, for instance, like titles, Barack Obama, President of the United States. We're talking like in a letter or an email. Same thing with degrees, like a letter or an email. Dates, for instance, or addresses, those are also things to be looking to look at. And then commas can be used for contrast or emphasis. There's 2 ways of using this. I like referring to the second version. This is what I'll use in the workshop. But here's for contrast and emphasis. Environmentalists contend that the Navy's use of sonar is hurting, maybe even killing whales. The problem is that often is very close to the natural pause rule. There's small subtle differences in the natural pause and contrast and emphasis. So rule 1 and rule 10. So I like to use the tag question, so a rhetorical question. So if we look at the bottom of that, he did not want this job as much as most people to seek it. That's sort of positive, isn't it? So usually asking a tag question or rhetorical question is another way of looking at this. And then comma setting off mild interjections, words like alas, yes, no, often used to answer rhetorical questions or tag questions. Words like alas, maybe the CIA will continue to do whatever it takes. Or no, schools are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. Look what happens if we take the comma out. No, schools are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. The whole meaning and intention of the sentence is changed by a simple comma. The difference between no, schools are doing exactly what they're supposed to do, as opposed to no, schools are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. Now, commas using direct address. You'll see this often like in letters, like letters to an editor, or in dialogue. So I don't mind telling you, dear readers, that the day the Cardinals walk onto the field as the NFC Super Bowl representatives will be the proudest day of my life. You notice that it's doing a direct address. The reason why they call it a direct address is because it is directly addressing somebody. It is talking to someone directly. So that's what's saying, I don't mind telling you. It's acting in the second, it's writing to someone in the second person. And then the rule 13 is a great one because it's the one that we all learned about first and how to use a comma back way when we were kids. Using a comma with he said, she replied, Mary asked, Jane remarked, Steve declared, etc., etc. So examples of usage. So let's take a look at this. Look, comma, we feel it's important that middle class people get some relief now. You notice, interestingly enough, so we have a mild interjection, look. So that would be rule 11. And then we have the comma before the quotation mark when it says Axelrod said on Meet the Press. You notice that the comma comes before the quotation mark, and then that would be rule 13. So if we look at like the worksheet, it would identifying the rule usage, it would be rule 11 and then rule 13. Now here's a fun one. Mr. Goldfinger exclaimed, comma, no, comma, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die. Now here's an interesting one because here's an implied you. So Mr. Goldfinger exclaimed, comma. So that remember, notice that even at the beginning or the end, the comma always comes before the quotation mark. So that would be rule 13. Then no, that would be a mild interjection. And then Mr. Bond, that's an implied you, interestingly enough. I don't use that in the workshop, but I just thought that would be fun to look at. because it's directed, it's directly addressing someone. And so you have the first comma is rule 13, the second comma is rule 11, and the third comma is rule 12. And then I expect you to die. Now you notice I don't have a period after the quotation mark because you don't need one. The exclamation point has a period at the bottom of it, if you've noticed. That the question mark and the exclamation point all have periods. So you don't, I notice that some people tend to put periods after all that. You don't need to. The period's already built into your exclamation point.